All right, we should be live on everything that we can be live on. Good morning, Visaka, Sunya, Geeta, Melissa. We'll give it another minute or two to get people in, and we'll get started. We'll give the link. Welcome, Matthias. Good morning, Heather. Let's give it another minute, and then we'll get started. Welcome, Mukya. All right, I think we can get started. So, friends, welcome to the fourth of 4 sessions that I'll be doing these Friday mornings. Starting next Friday, Bhante Sudasa will be back and he'll be doing these again. So today we've been going through Satipatthana or the Satipatthana Sutta. I put the links for those who like to follow along as we've been going along. And so we've covered how Satipatthana is a toolbox that gives us a variety of different tools to investigate our experience. We covered on the first Friday, 3 Fridays ago. We covered Chittanupasana, observing and understanding the body as it is, and its various aspects, various elements, various postures, things like that. We understood the body. Then we covered Vedananupasana, which is understanding feeling or sensation, pleasant, painful, neutral, of the body, not of the body. Last week we covered Chittanupasana, which is investigating and understanding the various aspects of mind, the general tone of the mind, the thoughts, impulses, various things that arise in the mind. And when I first was learning years and years ago, when I first learned about Satipatthana, it was very common for people to translate this last one as mind objects. And it never kind of made sense to me. It always felt a little weird. And I don't even know exactly where that originated. But the fourth one is called Dhammanupasana, right? Contemplation of Dhammas. And again, I think that part of the confusion comes from the various ways that you can understand and translate the word Dhamma. Dhamma is a word that can mean the nature of reality. It's a word that it can mean in a more general sense somebody's teaching, like Buddha's Dhamma, Jesus's Dhamma, Muhammad's Dhamma, Hindu Dhamma, whatever. So just like somebody's Dhamma. You can see this in the suttas where we have the Dhamma of the Buddha, the Dhamma of the Jains, etc. So you see that as like the teaching, somebody's Dhamma. And it also could mean like all phenomena, like observing, understanding the Dhamma as phenomena. But here, when you see what's put in, when you see what's put in the section on Dhammanupassana, then you might be able to have a better understanding of why now we see multiple people like Bhante Sujato, Bhante Analio, are translating this last section as investigation or contemplation of principles. Whose principles? Well, the Buddha's principles. So the various parts of Dhammanupassana are not some kind of fourth, how shall I say, separate fourth aspect of mind-body experience. They actually, in many ways, they encompass all of the other ones: mind, body, feeling. So we'll go through these. We're not going to read them all in great depth because there's a lot. This is by far the biggest section. And when you go to the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, where the Four Noble Truths are greatly expanded, it becomes gigantic. It becomes a really big sutta. So we're not going to read this every word like we did the last couple, because there wasn't that much to read. But we'll go through it. And if you'd like to follow along, you can go through with the link. So welcome Charles Lee, Yankee, Buddha, Ruchi, Jayanta, and John. So when we go through this, you'll understand, oh yeah, this is the Dhamma. This is our principles that the Buddha taught to use as objects of investigation to understand our experience. So the first one is the hindrances. And how does a mendicant observe an aspect of principles? It's when a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of principles with respect to the five hindrances. And so I'll just use the first one as an example because we've seen this before. It's when a mendicant who has sensual desire in them understands, I have sensual desire in me. When they don't have any sensual desire in them, they understand, I don't have sensual desire in me. They understand how sensual desire arises and when it's already arisen and given up, and how once it's given up, it doesn't arise again in the future. So these are different avenues that the Buddha is this is a schematic. This is like a lesson plan. All right, so observe the hindrances. Now, these are the different ways you can do it, right? When it's in your mind, when it's not in your mind. When it's arising, when it's ceasing, how it arose, how it ceases. All of these things are different lesson plans, different places for you to say, okay, I'm going to investigate, this hindrance has arisen in me, and I'm going to investigate in this way. That the Buddha is giving us like little hints. Aim there. Look in this spot. Try to figure out this aspect of this hindrance. And so we have the five hindrances. And the five hindrances are, in short, kama chanda. So kama is like sensual pleasures. pleasant experiences through the senses. Chanda means like your intention, your desire, your choice to engage with them, like to be wrapped up in them, to chase after them. So that's kama chanda. That's a hindrance. And the Buddha calls them a hindrance, nivarana. These are hindrances to deep states of concentration. So understanding the hindrances very deeply is an extremely important part of the Noble Eightfold Path, of following the path, especially with related to the samadhi division, especially related to right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So understanding these hindrances, very important. And you'll see, once you understand them, you'll see actually, oh, I have these hindrances a lot. I have these hindrances all the time. Right? And part of understanding these hindrances is satipatthana. Right? I can develop my mindfulness by observing these hindrances, and my mindfulness can be greatly enhanced by understanding how to starve these hindrances and suppress them so that they are not impacting me. Right? So first one, kamachanda. Second is vyapada, ill will. Third, you'd have tinnamita, which is mental and physical tiredness, often translated as sloth and torpor. Fourth, you have uddhacca kukucca. This is restlessness and remorse. So kind of like the opposite of a mind that's really sloth and tired is the mind that's jumping all around. Right? A mind that is full of restlessness, lots of thoughts, lots of agitation, lots of movement, lots of remorse, thinking about, bad, things that you did in the past that you're remorseful over or that you worry about. And then the last one is vicikicca, doubt. This is often described as doubt in the Triple Gem, but this also can be expanded to doubt about yourself in your own practice. These days, after so many years of practice, I have very little doubt in the Triple Gem and the teachings of the Buddha. But sometimes, maybe even often, depends, not recently, but sometimes I have a doubt. It's like, wow, can I actually become awakened? Can I actually follow this path? So even, not only doubts about the Triple Gem, but even doubts about your own ability to follow the path can be a big hindrance, because you're always worried about, oh no, can I even do this? So these are the 5 hindrances. And these, any practitioner, anyone who follows the Noble Eightfold Path should understand these in and out. Right? You can see that they are in your mind quite often. Right? There's many opportunities to investigate these, to understand them, to know them deeply. And the Buddha in the sutta called Ahara, Ahra, nutriment, talks a little bit about how you feed these hindrances and how you starve the hindrances. And obviously, we don't want to feed the hindrances. Anything that is unskillful, that is harmful, that is bad, that causes us to act unskillfully, we want to starve. Anything that is skillful and beneficial, we want to feed. And we don't know that they're even, we can't starve and feed or have any impact on these hindrances or any defilement that arises in the mind without first observing and understanding that it's in the mind. Right? So this is why it's important to practice satipatthana, so that we can develop the ability to see, oh, I had this hindrance in my mind. What you have to, before you can do anything about it, you have to know that it's there. You have to acknowledge it, understand it. And then Once you are able to see that it's there, then you can practice different, trying different techniques, trying to figure out different ways, like how do I starve this? How do I how do I lessen this? But the first step, that's the step of sati. The step of sati is understanding that it's there. That's the importance of mindfulness. Mindfulness allows us to see that something is there, to observe the reality of something, and then we can apply, effort to either sustain it and build it, or to abandon it, depending on whether it's skillful or unskillful. Welcome. Oh boy, we have a bunch of people that just, okay. We have welcome, Bhavani, welcome. Milan, a few Facebook users, Meta, Edward, Smiley, Chev, Anthony. All right. Okay, so this is the first part. This is the 5 hindrances. Very important. Very, very important for understanding, especially if we're trying to practice jhanas. But the great thing about satipatthana is that if you practice satipatthana, you can subdue the hindrances. There's a sutta. It's literally just a paragraph. I think it's maybe in the Anguttara Nikaya. And it's just a paragraph. And all it says is, to subdue the hindrances, one should practice satipatthana. Right? So if you master satipatthana, if you take on satipatthana as as a toolbox, and you practice it, and your sati is always there, always close, you're always easily recollecting that you should be mindful, then this will be a powerful tool for you. And so at the end of each section, it's going to be just like the same as all the other sections. They meditate observing principles internally, externally, both internally and externally. So again, remember, internally of this mind and body, externally outside this mind and body. That's an important thing to see. So think about the hindrances in yourself and the hindrances in other people and other beings. You can reflect on that. They meditate as observing principles as liable to originate, to rise, as liable to vanish, as liable to both originate and vanish. Or mindfulness is established that principles exist to the extent necessary for knowledge and mindfulness. All right. So the next is the aggregates. Furthermore, a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of principles with respect to the 5 grasping aggregates. And how does a mendicant meditate, observe an aspect of principles regarding the 5 grasping aggregates? It's when a mendicant contemplates such as form, such as the origin of form, such as the ending of form. So this is an interesting one, because it's not just the 5 aggregates here. It's the 5 grasping aggregates, which makes it even deeper, right? Because the 5 aggregates are important to understand. But more important to understand is how we create the 5 grasping aggregates out of them. When you investigate, okay, 5 aggregates, form, this body. All right. Yes. Oh, this is my body. I've grasped onto it. I've clung on to this form as mine, me, mine, myself. I have created the grasping aggregate of form. It's just form, but I've clung on to it. So that's the key. That's where this is going, is you observe, oh, how did that clinging arise? How do I observe how that form was taken on as me, mine, myself? Observing that, the clinging aggregate of form. What about feeling? Oh, feeling has arisen. Pain has arisen. Oh, it's my pain. Oh, right? I've clung on to that. Or, oh, that's my pleasure. I've clung on to that as me, mine, myself. It has arisen. How did that arise? Pain arose. So you can observe this when you practice good satipatthana. You can see pain arises, and then separately from that, ow, my pain, my knee is in pain. My pain has arisen. You can observe those processes. Like that's what satipatthana is so powerful for, so important for. And then when you practice satipatthana and you start to observe the pain, observe the feeling, you actually become like separate from it. You gain distance from it, and you can see more clearly how you attach to that pain or that pleasure as me, mine, and myself. Grasping aggregates. The aggregates are just processes. They're just things that are occurring based on causes and conditions due to dependent origination. These five aggregates have come together and they've clumped. That's what an aggregate it is. That's a khanda, like a clumping, a coming together. They've come together to form this being. And then our mind has added on the extra clinging. And the Buddha says the definition of dukkha, it says in brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are dukkha. And a sutta where the Buddha, Sariputta is asked, identity, what is identity? Sariputta says, the Buddha has said that the five aggregates subject to clinging are identity. So when we observe the five aggregates subject to clinging, we directly observe dukkha. We directly observe how we are causing ourselves suffering. Very important principles. Very important thing. It's not a surprise why the five aggregates subject to clinging are part of satipatthana. Because these are such deep wisdom and insight can be developed by aiming your mindfulness, aiming your lighthouse beam of mindfulness at these aggregates. Perception, same thing. We have perception that arises, and we think, "Oh, this perception is mine," and "Oh, this perception is right." We never question our perception. It's my perception, so of course it must be right. When in reality, as you start to observe perception, you see how faulty it is. You see how untrustworthy your perception is. You can't just automatically trust it. You have to question it. And then our choices, our sankharas, choices, karma, right? Observing that and observing consciousness. So these are very, very important aspects to understand. Right? So again, it's no wonder, right? The hindrances. These are all principles. These are all things that the Buddha has taught for us to know very deeply, to understand very deeply with pajanati. Pajanati, again, as I always keep saying, means not like, oh, I read it in a book and I understand it. It means that I have experienced it. I have observed it. I know it deeply, intimately. And that's how we're supposed to know all these aspects of satipatthana. The body, the feeling, the mind, and all of these principles. Very important places. The sense fields. Salayatana. Furthermore, a mendicant meditates by observing an aspect of principles with respect to the 6 interior and exterior sense fields. And how do they do so? Well, same framework here. It's when they understand I, internal sense base, sights, external sense base, and the fetter that arises dependent on both of these. The fetter, the chain, the attachment, the clinging, the grasping. That's what it is. The I, and I see a sight, and then, ooh, I like that sight. Oh, I don't like that sight. I want to see more of this. I don't want to see any more of that. Now, that's what's being talked about here. Observing that understanding, the fetter that arises, the attachment, the clinging that arises as soon as a sense field has a sensory experience. They understand how that fetter has not arisen, comes to arise, how the arisen fetter comes to be abandoned, and how the abandoned fetter comes to not arise again in the future. Again, the Buddha is pointing, it says, observe and try to investigate, try to understand these aspects. How does this arise? How early can you observe it arising? Try to observe it as early as possible, and then maybe even be able to observe the different conditions that had to be present first for this to then arise, right? You observe, you can see the different conditions, the different levels of the different causes and effects of how this arose. And then also how it can cease, how it can be abandoned. So these senses are very important. So we see the eye, right? Eye, form, ear, sound, nose, odor, tongue, taste, body, tactile sensations, and the mind and mind objects. That's internal and external. So when a sound arises, and we notice there's a sensation, there's a feeling. This is a pleasant sensation. The birds are chirping in the morning. This is an unpleasant sensation. I don't know, the garbage trucks or something loud happens, or somebody drives by with their windows open and their music at 11. Right, unpleasant. And so we can observe the 6 senses the Buddha calls the 6 senses 2 things. Sabbha, the all, and loka, the world. All of our experiences that we can experience in this life are filtered through, come in through the 6 senses. Everything. Even as human beings, because we've become smarter and we've developed science and technology, we've been able to make machines that can sense other things that we can't in this body, right? There's this body can't sense certain radio wavelengths. Like we can hear certain radio wavelengths, right? We turn on the radio, we hear, but there's others that we can't. But we're able to make like satellites that can go into space and hear these wavelengths. But then what do? Right? We interpret the data that arises from that machine through our own senses. And that interpretation can be true, it could be false, it could be all kinds of things. There's nothing that we can experience outside of this mind and this body and these 6 senses. There's nothing that we can experience outside of this. So this is the ground of our experience, the six senses. This is the all. This is the world. And so one of the epithets, one of the things we hear about the Buddha, where he says, knower of the worlds. It's not just meaning like he knows about, the different world systems, and he knows, all about like, Alpha Centauri over there and these kind of things. It means that he knows this mind and this body. He knows these six senses. He understands these senses and how the senses are kind of, humans have a certain set of senses, but different animals, different beings in samsara have different senses. Like we don't have echolocation like a bat or a dolphin, right? Like pinging out sound and then hearing it come back and knowing when things are there. We don't have that. So different beings, whatever beings that will inhabit, have different senses, but still the same framework is the same, right? Internal sense bases, external sense bases, and the contact that arises between the two, and then the craving, the clinging that arises based on that contact. So you can spend your whole life investigating all the aspects of all the experiences of the senses. It's a very, very deep place to investigate. And again, not a surprise that it's part of Satipatthana. Not a surprise at all. Next is the awakening factors. So the 7 factors of awakening, bhojanga, are factors that are developed along the path and that you can observe. So the first one, of course, is sati, mindfulness. When you have sati, you see things that you haven't seen before. Things start to pop up. Well, this is what I've experienced, and this is what I talk about when you practice mindfulness very well, very deeply. It's like all of a sudden, all kinds of opportunities and ways of doing things arise that, you never saw those opportunities before because you weren't mindful. That's one of the reasons why a mindful person can act so skillfully, because they can see avenues, they can see ways of doing things. They could be in a crowd of 7 or 8 people, and they can see 4 or 5 or 6 different ways of doing things differently than the rest of them, because they have mindfulness, because they have the skill honed of being mindful, of satipatthana. So when mindfulness arises, you start to see things that you didn't see before. And then, what happens think about natural human tendency. When we see things that we've not seen before, we get curious. We want to investigate them. The next factor is Dhamma Vichaya, investigation of Dhammas, investigation of all the phenomena that are arising. This is why, like my preceptor Bhante Jay will say, if the breath is boring, you're not doing it right. And it took me years to realize that, but once I did, I realized, my mindfulness was not strong enough. Like when you actually see the breath at a deeper level, you could spend years upon years, decades, observing the characteristics of the breath as it goes more subtle and more deep. In the beginning, you can't see that. Your mind doesn't even want to stay on the breath 2 seconds. But the deeper you go, and the more stronger your mindfulness, stronger your satipatthana, stronger your ability to stay on the breath, then you can see these things. And so then you would say, oh, this is interesting. I want to stay here. I want to investigate this, right? This is why if you hear me talk about investigation all the time, to investigate this, well, it's the second factor of awakening. We need to investigate, understand. And when we're actively investigating something, what happens? We have virya, energy. The breath isn't boring anymore. We're not falling asleep. We're not going over here. We have energy. We want to investigate. And then when that energy happens and we're investigating, we have rapture, piti. And then once after that rapture, we have passaddhi, we have tranquility. As we're investigating, this is where also you can see where that sutta that I said, where the Buddha says, practicing satipatthana leads to the abandoning of the hindrances and to jhana. That's it. This is showing this stead. So you start with mindfulness, investigation, then energy, rapture, tranquility. These are all samadhi factors. And then samadhi. And then after that, upekkha, equanimity. Equanimity is what you find in the third and the fourth jhanas, to be able to see things very deeply. So these 7 factors are cover both right mindfulness and right concentration. Samasati, samasamadhi. Very important. And so all of these factors are developed over the time of the practice as you're following the Noble Eightfold Path, and you develop them. And you can observe when they are in the mind and when they are not in the mind, just as we've been going, the same factors. And of course, internally and externally, arising, ceasing, same things. Now, of course, if we're dealing with the principles of the Buddha, the next step is the Four Noble Truths. And again, these Four Noble Truths, welcome Upasika, Metika, and Morgana, Kyo, and Sud, and Victoria. All right. So these Four Noble Truths are, of course, to be understood. Right? Again, not a surprise that they would be under principles, under the various the teaching frameworks that the Buddha has given us. Understanding dukkha, understanding how dukkha arises, understanding how dukkha ceases, and understanding the path leading to the cessation of dukkha. Of course, we would understand the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths are the deepest understanding. Only an arahant fully understands them in their full depth and breadth. Only an arahant. The rest of us are gradually, as we're practicing, we're gradually developing them. We're gradually understanding them slowly. And so we observe, and the Four Noble Truths are put here the same as the other ones. They understand these things, and then they observe an aspect of the Four Noble Truths internally and externally, and they meditate, observing how these are liable to originate and to vanish, the same as the others. And so as we come to the end, that's the end of the Dhammanupassana section. And we're coming to the end, just the last couple of minutes. I will read this last part, because this last part's so wonderful. This last part, remember, in the beginning of the sutta, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, for the attaining of the right path, nibbana. right? So this starts out very important to understand this. The importance of Satipatthana cannot be understated. It is, or overstated, I should say, cannot be overstated. This is extremely important part of the path. It is the direct path for the overcoming of suffering. So let's read this, the closing section. Anyone who develops these 4 kinds of mindfulness in this way for 7 years can expect one of 2 results: enlightenment in the present life, or if there's something left over, to be a non-returner. Let alone 7 years. Anyone who develops these 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in this way for 6 years, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 7 months, 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, 3 months, 2 months, 1 month, a fortnight, 2 weeks, let alone a fortnight. Anyone who develops these 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation in this way for 7 days can expect one of 2 results: enlightenment in this present life, or if there's something left over, non-return. So if you honestly and sincerely, with strong dedication, starting today, said, okay, for the next 7 days, I'm going to live and breathe Satipatthana, at the end of the week, you might become awakened. Well, or at least you might become a non-returner. But this is the power of this. You know, at Bhavana Society, for when we'd have the Satipatthana retreat, which would be a week, we would make the little jokes. It's like, if you practice well, by the end of this retreat, you could be an arahant. And of course, it's not to make light of it. What I would say is this. This is not, if you just learned about Satipatthana at the beginning of the retreat, probably be pretty hard to become awakened by the end of the retreat. But if you practice Satipatthana for many years, maybe, and then you decide for a week, you say, I'm going to fully dedicate this week to Satipatthana, chances might be pretty good, I would guess. It might be something that, in 10 years or so, I might give a shot for myself. But I've been practicing Satipatthana for 15 years, and it's been a constant companion. So Satipatthana is amazing, and it's great, and I encourage you all to develop it. So the final thing, the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation are the path to convergence. So this is the same as the beginning. They are in order to purify sentient beings, to get past sorrow and crying, to make an end of pain and sadness, to end the cycle of suffering, and to realize extinguishment. That is what I said, and that's why I said it. This is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, the mendicants were happy with what the Buddha said. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And what else can be done after finishing the Satipatthana Sutta but exclaiming many sadhus and then putting it into practice? Putting it into practice is always the most important thing. So we are 15 minutes left. So 15 minutes from here on in, we can go over questions. So we have a monk chat tonight. So if there's questions that are not related to Satipatthana, we can save those questions for later on tonight for monk chat. But anything related to Satipatthana mindfulness, anything that I've said in the last 4 sessions, if you have questions, if you want me to clarify something, then please put it in the chat. And there was already a couple questions, so I'll scroll back and check those out. Buddha-ruchi says, would you kindly speak about reflection as opposed to meditation? Is there, in fact, a difference? Thank you. So when we're talking about English, there's some problems with the word. So the word meditation in English is ancient. It's very old. And it almost entirely doesn't mean what we use it for in terms of Buddhist meditation. It can, but mostly it means like being alone, being silent, and like contemplating things. Understand, like, I'm going to contemplate the meaning of life. I'm going to go into seclusion for a couple of weeks, and I'm just going to contemplate things. That's really so. For instance, like one of the greatest works in history, especially if you're into Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Marcus Aurelius was not practicing Satipatthana. He was not saying, "Okay, now I am following the breath." That's not what it means. It means that he was contemplating things, mulling over things, observing, understanding how to live life, how to deal with the ups and downs of life. Right? That's the meditation. So what I would say is that in Buddhism, if you want to clarify it more and like thinking of meditations in terms of Satipatthana and Samadhi, that will be meditation. And then contemplation and reflection is another separate thing. So you can have, say, you're doing Sila Nusati, reflecting on your good deeds. That's not like a meditation. That's not like, okay, I'm going to follow my breath, or I'm going to observe the feeling of my good deeds. You could do that technically, I think. But this is like bringing up in your mind the good deeds that you've done in the past. This is to help you so that you don't, so that you can reflect that you've done good things and stuff like that. And so that's a pure reflection. That's a pure meditation, to use the English word in its original context. That's not a meditation as in like Satipatthana or Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. So both of these practices are found in the Noble Eightfold Path. Both of these practices. So you're both actively meditating, actively observing, investigating, and also actively contemplating, actively thinking. So all of these, are aspects of the path that work together. Like they're all important aspects of the path. Welcome. Oh, I like trying to pronounce names that from places I don't have experience with, but I'm probably also going to botch it. Diu Ha? Welcome, Diu. I don't know where that might be. Maybe Vietnam? I don't know. Jyoti, welcome. Upasika Metika. Oh, you're from Ireland. Oh, welcome. Let's see here. Bhavani asks a very good question. What does it mean by objects of the mind? So these are, when you're talking about the six senses, remember the mind is one of the senses. So the mind is the internal. Mind objects are the external. And what are mind objects? Thoughts that arise, impulses, right? Things that arise in the mind. And it's interesting. This was an insight for me when this first dawned on me, that the Buddha classifies thoughts as external, as things coming from somewhere else. that was an interesting contemplation. And like, that was like, this dawned on me years after I really started to understand that thoughts were not me. It's like, oh, the Buddha was pointing to that. I didn't understand it. I didn't observe it. Or I didn't know because maybe I had heard it in a different way. But I understood it after I started having experiences and understanding not self, anatta. And I just, oh, yeah, they are. Yeah, they definitely are external. Right? That's a very important thing, because normally, before I had my breakthroughs in not self and understanding thoughts and things like that, I can just remember that I almost always just accepted whatever thought arose in my mind as mine. I never questioned it. And I just would think, oh, okay, yeah, this is just the thought that's arising and it's true. But then after years of practice, after I started developing insights into it, I said, oh, wait, no. This is not necessarily me, and I don't have to accept it as mine. And furthermore, if I did go along with this, it would lead to my harm and the harm of others. So yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore. So mind objects, you think about the objects, the aspects, the things that are happening in the mind, like thoughts, like impulses, things that are arising unbidden in the mind. Right? Most thoughts, you're not actively bringing them to life. They're thoughts that are arising, right? When you're trying to follow your breath, how often you're just like, nah, I'm tired of the breath. I'm going to just daydream. No, most people, for most of the time, they don't do that. They're trying to follow their breath, and thoughts are arising. Objects are entering in the mind. Objects are arising. And we run after the objects that we like. We run away from the objects we don't like. But that's what it's meant by objects of the mind. It's like the mind is the container, and the objects are the things you put in the container. Good question. How to know you have experienced piti or rapture? I think that the best person to ask this is probably Bhante Sudaso, because I don't know that I've ever experienced it. I've had a few experiences that I think possibly could be it, but I'm not quite sure. Because, and I'm going by what the suttas describe, but also what, I've heard Bhante Jay describe it as, or Ajahn Brahm describe it as. It's described as a pleasant feeling that comes from the mind that is more pleasant than anything you can experience of the body. Like Ajahn Brahm just comes out and says, basically, it's better than sex, right? It's like whatever's like the most pleasurable experience you can experience. Piti is way more pleasurable than that. Right? And I don't think I've experienced that before. So I can't say to know when you've experienced it or not. I think probably, but I have, Bhante Sudaso has spoken about it in the past, that he's experienced it. And so I think he might be a better person when he comes back to keep that question for him. Charles Lee has a question, but it's a more in-depth one. So I'm going to try to knock out some of these small ones real quick. So I'll just go to Victoria. What would you say is the difference between mindfulness in Buddhism versus mindfulness in yoga media? So no mindfulness basically existed before the Buddha. Like the Buddha, all mindfulness originates with the Buddha. Everything else that calls itself mindfulness after probably has some elements of original Buddhist mindfulness. but also is missing things as well. Mindfulness is also not the practice in and of itself. Like the Buddha says in a sutta, that mindfulness alone is not enough to abandon ill will. You need to practice metta, right? So a lot of times people will kind of like surgically remove mindfulness from everything else and say, oh, this is a good practice. And it can be to a point, but when you take it out of its context, it's not nearly as powerful and potent and useful as it could be. Could you speak about the 4 ways for the 5 aggregates that we form a self or personality view? Actually, now that I think about the 4 ways for the 5 aggregates, what are the 4 ways? My mind is like tripping on the way this is put in context. The 4 ways for the 5 aggregates form a personality view. I bet you as soon as I know the 4 ways, I know exactly what to say. But that the way that question is, does that anything pop up for you? No, it doesn't pop up for you either. Yeah. The way the question is worded, I think is messing me up. Gita has 2 questions. Bhante, how can one, after realizing arising unskillful thoughts, how can one skillfully dismiss them? Okay, so this is a good question. One thing that you can't or you should not do, unless you're really about to do something really, really bad, is try to force it out of your mind. Because trying to force it out of it or getting agitated about it is actually just going to make it worse. You're feeding it. You're giving it more power, like the anger-eating demon, right? When you spew anger at it, it just gets more handsome and more powerful. So that you don't want to do that. The best thing to do is to have keep an observation on it, to keep investigating it, and then to apply different, like you're applying Band-Aids to a wound, you apply different techniques. Like this unskillful thought has arisen. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it is agitation towards somebody who you think is like in an out group. I can't believe this person. They believe that. They believe this. And then you can reflect on, oh, well, they're a being in samsara just like me. Their perception is horrible, just like mine. And don't kid yourself. Even if you think you have great perception, in general, our perception's bad. It's not trustworthy. It could be right, but it has to be investigated, right? So you're pointing, you're trying to do these reflections to understand, to counteract that unskillfulness. What is skillful? And then let me try to do what is skillful to counteract the unskillfulness, to try to lessen it, to try to cut out its power over you. Doing these kind of reflections, right? Bringing up something in the mind. Anytime my mind starts to be judgmental of somebody else, my mind has been trained, even from a young age, I despise hypocrisy. So anytime my mind starts to judge somebody else, another part of my mind comes in and says, well, what the heck about you? What about you and all the things that you're doing wrong? So you developing these kind of countermeasures, right? These mechanisms of the mind to go against that. That's why, Buddha says the counteraction to ill will in the mind is metta, right? To abandon ill will, you practice metta, right? So there's these counters in the practice, and you develop them and you test them. And, one monk says such and such, you should try this. And then you try it and it doesn't work. And another monk says, you should try this in this situation. And you try it and it works for you. Right? The first monk might not be wrong. It worked for him or her, and maybe it worked for other people, but it didn't work for you. So you have to, it's a constant trying, like trial and error, trying things out, seeing if they work, and then adjusting. And okay, we're past 9, but let me see here. Oh, do we post it? Let's see the Dhammas. Okay, so this is just a continuation of that, the last one. Yeah, and Majjhima Nikaya number 20 is removal of distracting thoughts. The Buddha gives a few things of what to do. Like one is, like you say, to replace an unskillful thought with a skillful thought. Like he uses, like a carpenter replaces an old peg with a new one, like a peg in a piece of wood. The old rotty one falls out, and you put the new one in there. So yeah, you can do that. Oh, Charles Lee. Okay, yes, regarding the self. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I read in a translation that says an untaught person regards form as self, or self as possessed of form, or form as in self, or self as in form. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, actually, yeah. Ask that in monk chat, because we're over time, and I'd like to explain more, have more time to talk about that. That's a good one. All right, friends. So that is the end for this Friday morning. Next Thursday morning, Friday morning, or next Thursday? No, not next Thursday morning, but next Friday morning, Bhante Siddhasa will be back to continue on with doing his sutta readings with you. So, friends, Sukhi Hotu, may you be happy, practice well, and be well. Until next time, may you have a spiritually successful and peaceful practice.